You are listening to Cemetery Confessions, the world's #1 goth talk podcast.
Hello and welcome back to a bonus episode of Cemetery Confessions, made possible by the Patreons over at patreon.com/Cemetery Confessions. This is our hiatus month, but this special episode was made possible by them, and it's our second annual birthday party episode. Even though I'm relaxing, I'm on vacation, I'm not really. I'm actually hard at work trying to create more content for all of you, and what I've done is invite a whole bunch of goths over for my 32nd birthday to celebrate and party with me. And throughout the night, I'm going to be inviting friends up to the studio who have not been on the show before to sort of hang out and talk about their views on goth, which should be fun to get some local flavor, and that being that Chicago, and get some perspectives from younger and older goths about what goth means to them and how they view and experience the scene, and just sort of have that drink and hang out sort of vibe that we tried to embody on the show. So before we... Actually, you know what? It sounds like people are starting to show up, so why don't we flip on some music, pour some drinks, and I'll be back up in a minute.
Cone cups from the 80s.
I would love
Madonna.
those.
Yep.
Bullets. I was on bullets all the time until I saw them everywhere. I'm like, okay, now I'm done. Yeah. It was very like short.
Yeah, everybody started to wear them.
Yep. Well, the same thing with like the ones with like the skeleton hands.
Oh my
Same
god.
thing.
Yeah.
Well, that's why I get the ones that start the middle finger.
Autumn, you're chatty. Why don't you go first?
Oh boy.
It's fine. Don't worry about it.
But I'm the most starstruck, so I'd rather not.
Don't. You're fine. You're fine.
If it makes you feel better, I went first twice already, so...
You go first then.
I've already done this.
Trey's been on the show
Cemetery
like so many times.
Confessions, like,
All right, Autumn. Welcome to the studio.
Thanks for having me.
Welcome to my sex dungeon. So we're going to do 3 basic questions
Okay.
for everybody. Same thing. So the first question is just to get to know you. Tell me a little about how you discovered goth, how you got into it, why you were drawn to it.
It all didn't really start out with goth for me personally. I've been alternative for quite some time, really good portion of my life, but I didn't really become a part of the goth scene per se till about 6 years ago was when I finally put my foot in the door for that.
What was it you had some friends that were into it, or you found it online, or what was...
Well, my introduction to the scene all started out with just basic interest. It was music for me, because I never really got to meet or interact with anybody that was goth necessarily.
Yeah.
All the bands that I first started listening to are like the typical trio.
Marilyn Manson?
No.
Okay. Okay.
That's funny.
Black Veil
That's
Brides,
funny. Yeah.
Evanescence?
I will admit, however, to having a soft spot for Manson, but that's because I grew up, my...
So the front door is down the stairs? Feel
Yeah.
free to...
Well, I mean,
I'm just kidding.
My dad was a fan, so I kind of got that from him.
So you're saying Bauhaus, Susie, and Sisters, or
Yeah. And then it kind of branched off from that, Virgin Prunes, and I'm very big Alien Sex Fiend fan, and all the essentials.
did you have like pre-goth interests that were weird, like when you were real younger, or did you just go straight to the
Yeah.
to the good stuff?
Well, I've been always fascinated with things that your average individual would find creepy or weird, like taxidermy, dead things hanging around graveyards. I always found visiting graveyards and just hanging out and walking around very soothing and enjoyable. Yeah.
How would you define goth?
Man, this is a really difficult conversation.
Yeah, it is.
Conversation question, because it has a different meaning for everybody, and I don't know. For me, it's a lifestyle, and kind of a state of being, and at the same time a mindset. Obviously, it's very aesthetically driven, through influence of the music that we like and listen to. So yeah.
What is it meant for you then? Is it just a kind of cool thing that you like to do, or is there a deeper? So when I became a part of the scene, I kind of came home, so to speak. So I kind of felt like I just naturally belonged. Yeah.
I found this extended family of weirdos that all like the same stuff I do, and it was just a good way to express myself.
Have you run into any? Because I know you do at least go out to shows and club events occasionally.
Mm-hmm.
But have you had people that were condescending or gave you kind of the "Are you goth enough?" test, or the any of that business?
Yeah, actually, I've come across a few. Thankfully, there aren't very many of those around. They do exist, and they're out there, but yeah, I interacted with a few people that, when I started going out to clubs and events, I didn't really feel accepted, or kind of like I had to prove myself to them.
For people to want to hang out with you or talk?
Yeah, for people to even acknowledge
Yeah.
my existence, which kind of stinks, but
unfortunate.
yeah. But after a little while, I kind of was able to take a step back and realize, hey, well, you don't necessarily have to prove
Yeah.
you're
Just be yourself.
who you are to everybody else,
Yeah.
I definitely think that it's pretty robust. I mean, because of the kind of person I am, I find it very easy to interact and socialize with a bunch of different people. I wasn't always like that. It used to be very, very quiet, and I used to keep to myself a lot more, but because I am an entertainer, that kind of helped me branch out, so to speak. And
last question was... So, as you said, about 6 years, how long have you been going out to events?
Regularly, probably 2 or 3.
2 or 3 years.
Yeah.
So, from the perspective of someone who's fairly fresh in the
Yes.
Chicago scene, do you interact online at all? Like, watch YouTube videos or join goth Facebook groups or whatever, or Reddit or...
I kind of look and observe at a lot of goth groups on social media, but I don't really do very much when it comes to those areas, because I find that a lot of it is very like one-sided.
Yeah.
If that makes
Sure.
sense.
Sure.
There's not really a whole lot. I mean it's nice to get to know other goths and kind of socialize a little bit, but for me, I just never really felt the need to go on any of those platforms.
How do you feel the state of the scene is, as far as...
I think for Chicago, obviously myself, I'm out of the suburbs, but in Chicago, it's pretty decent. There's definitely a decent amount of nights and events that one has the possibility to go to. It's kind of a unfortunate thing though, because most of the events that are put on are 18 or older, and that kind of limits the younger ones.
That's about it. Any discussions that you want to have otherwise?
Not really. I appreciate you having me on. The only other thing was, I did mention I am an entertainer, which I always like to put out there, because it's
for sure
something that's a little unexpected from somebody in our scene. So you can find me on Facebook. I'm Magic Autumn, like the season, my first name. And I'm a balloon artist and do some magic as well.
Yeah, go hire Autumn. I'll put a link to your Facebook page in the show notes. Cool. Thanks, man.
Do I need to stand, or am I good here?
No, you're fine. Yeah, that's fine. All right, same questions. Tell me a little bit about. Tell me how you got into alternative stuff or goth stuff, or how that all came about, and why why that connected with you on some level.
It pretty much connected with me throughout most of my life, I have to say. Some influence I'd have to give to my mother, actually. I mean, she's not goth, but some of the things that she'd do for us when we were younger, like she'd take us to cemeteries all the time and try to scare us, but during night she'd just take us there, tell us stories, and we'd go walk around and look at the gravestones and the tombstones and everything. A couple of times it's been into, I guess, Cuba Road was one of them.
Yeah.
But back then, there wasn't as much talk about it as there was now. But it was because of her, and then I started to see more about, this is more me. This feels more comfortable for me around around the macabre and things like that. And as a child as well, I had ADD and ADHD, however they wanted to label it to me. But I was always calm when I would start writing things myself. Like, I used to write old ghost or zombie or horror stories as a kid, which landed me in therapy sessions, especially through elementary school. But most of the time people just said I was still just the nicest kid anyway.
I did have a few calls to home about, your son wrote this a story about ants eating his family alive. What was that? What's happening over there?
These were very graphic and gore-ridden stories.
Nice.
Also because my parents felt that I should be incorporated to horror movies at a really young age, which is why I think I was maybe 6 or 7 years old where I saw Rocky Horror Picture Show for the first time. And it was an amazing movie, even as a kid, and I still love it even today. But yeah, it was mostly just we'd watch horror movies constantly, either old or new. Jason was always my guy. I didn't know too much about all the other ones, but it was mostly that. But I started incorporating being goth a lot more during my high school years, because that was when I was actually able to make my own outfits and just kind of like, because I love the style and I love the history and I love the architecture that I've seen through like Germany and like the everything, and that was my inspiration, I would say. But I grew up poor, so I didn't have much money, so I'd always make my own outfits or just make my own clothing and incorporate different things and ideas, and it just seemed, and it worked out really well for me. It was mostly that. It was just in high school is where it really flourished the most for me.
Did you have apparently I was lucky because there was about maybe 20-ish, I would call them mall goths now. I didn't know that at the time, but there was about 20 or so goths at my high school. Were there other weirdos? There were a few punks and other things as well. Did you have that kind of connection with people, or how did you discover, oh, this goth thing is a thing, and they love zombies and they love cemeteries?
It was mostly through movies and such like that, and also just talking to people. But even through high school, there were not that many goths. We were kind of a rare breed in our high school, at least. But I was able to we all mingled here and there. But I was one of the very few people who was actually able to mingle with almost every single group or clique as they have it in high school.
Yeah, I was the same way.
And it's what made it entertaining and cool, because there were people who didn't know anything about the scene would see me and they'd fear me. But at the same time, they'd be reassured by other people. It's like, oh no, he's one of the nicest people you'll ever meet.
Yeah.
It just don't judge people by the way they look and everything like that. And there was a couple other occurrences that really bugged me when I was being myself. One of them was my family. Pretty much everybody in my family, except for just me and my older brother, are Christian. I'm not Christian. I have no religious affiliation, but I grew up going to churches, so I learned things here. But I didn't see eye to eye with a lot of things, but I still respect, and I'd still like to help them out whenever they need assistance with anything. But there were times where when I volunteered to help at my old church, everybody would just automatically assume I was either a Satanist or getting the wrong impression, and would literally just not go down the same hallway or be anywhere near where I am. But the funny thing about that, though, is that only the youngest kids were the only ones who would come up to me and talk to me. But everybody else above that just left me be. And it really bugged me, because they're just ultimately judging me and they're getting the wrong idea. And it was getting very tiring of having to explain. It's like, no, we're not like this. We're not like this at all. Like, have a conversation. You'll get a better idea. Don't ultimately judge us. Not all of us are Satanists or anything like that. And it also happened in Wisconsin, far up Wisconsin, like northern Wisconsin, up in the Door County region. They used to have town elders. I don't know how it is anymore. But up there, we have a family cabin. And I go up there every now and then. But there was one year where I made the news, apparently, because there's not... I was literally the only goth up there.
Yeah.
And I made the news, and it was scaring the locals. Apart from, some people who actually knew me and knew that I actually incorporated myself and talked to people throughout the community. But those who didn't know me just ultimately judged me and saying, oh, the goths or Satanists are coming up here and things like that. And, just a big hubbub over nothing. And that was another thing that bugged me. And before, I never even didn't think that there was much of a stigma, or it seemed like there was a stigma. It's just how we express ourselves, just who we are. But I didn't necessarily see that until I started hearing these stories as I got older. But
So what's your view on that sort of debate around Gillian Venter's book, where she says that goths should generally be amiable and friendly to other people who want to ask questions or be patient with others, just so that we kind of reflect better on non-goths? Do you think that's a good general principle, or do you land on the other side where some people will say, like, well, no, you should just be who you are, and if you're somebody who doesn't want to talk to people, then you don't have a responsibility to represent weirdos everywhere, kind of thing?
it kind of feels like a mix of both. I mean, I'm more of a firm believer that we should always have like a nice civil discussion about these things, so that people will have an understanding, because it just goes back to the old saying. It's like, fear is one of the oldest emotions that we have, and if you act on that.
Was that Lovecraft?
It was Lovecraft. Okay. It's like one of the oldest is fear. I'm paraphrasing partially it, but I prefer to I prefer to be myself, and I encourage that other people should always be comfortable to be ourselves, and we don't need the rest of everybody else to dictate how we should be. But we should still have conversations or discussions about, this is who we are, this is what we do. Like, we prefer you just not to judge us openly, like just have a conversation. A lot of us are probably very open to just talking about it really quickly, or just even saying a few things. Like, just how I feel more about that.
Yeah, going back to the church thing, it reminded me when I was in, I must have been in high school, but I was a youth leader, and I was like all in on the Christian Jesus stuff. I'm all in on all of your theology and everything. And I still got people in the church that would give me shit for wearing Hot Topic pants, basically. And they would still like talk to my parents about, do you think that's appropriate? That I remember there was one point where my youth leader, or the youth pastor, had this epiphany where I pulled up in my car and rolled down a window and was talking to somebody. Their whole face changed, and they were like, "Oh my God, your car is black too!" Like, they had this realization of this is actually part of your life, and it's part of your personality. And there was just this huge aversion to it, even though I was all in on everything they were preaching. It was just so weird. Autumn, did you grow up with Christian in a religious family, or did you have to deal with that?
You know what? I've been very quiet and out.
Do you not want to talk about
the entire evening? But I actually am religious.
Okay, well, that's fine.
Yeah.
As someone who's religious, which is I'm totally cool with. But do you get problems from other religious people that think there's something wrong with the music?
I'll tell you a small bit of my my life's story, so to speak, without taking up too much of the time. I've
got nothing to do tonight, so talk.
So I'll just start out by saying, for a very long time, I was always brought up in the church. Ever since I was a little kid. In high school, when I was old enough to kind of figure out what was happening, so to speak, I started attending a youth group. That ended up kind of changing the way I felt for a very long time, and I got my feelings hurt very bad by that youth group that I once upon a time really liked going to.
Yeah.
And that it was kind of, it left a bad taste in my mouth.
Yeah.
It was very disheartening they're making all these false misconceptions about me because I choose to look a little bit different. I think fast forward. Go ahead.
Yes, I was just gonna say, I think you also run into that in just any group in general.
Oh yeah.
You could say, like, with goth, people will give you shit for being into what any given thing, and say you're not, you can't be part of our club anymore because you like
Absolutely.
My Little Pony or whatever, whatever nonsense. So.
Yeah, that happens all the time.
Yeah.
On that note, yeah, I have to battle with double-edged swords, so to speak. Being an outspoken Christian and a goth at the same time, it comes with its challenges. Thankfully nowadays, I've come to a comfortable spot. I am respectful of people in certain settings, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
So like I go to church, I am still myself. I'm very transparent. I don't put on this false disguise and like dress up any differently than I do any other day of the week. I come with all my jewelry on. Sometimes, heck, I even show up to church with my makeup on. That took a very, very long time to be comfortable and to find like a place that like doesn't have anybody questioning or hassling me. Yeah.
That was my favorite thing to do when I was still Christian. At one point, I was like going around to different churches to find a place that I liked.
Okay.
And my favorite thing to do was to wear my 7-inch Demonia boots with a skirt, and to go to different churches and see. All right, if I walk in, are people going to be total assholes and like give me weird looks, or are they just going to be friendly? And that was like my test to see if I would want to go to that church or not.
We are told as Christians to come as you are.
Yeah, that was a big,
and it's still to me to this day a huge important thing to me. I take that quite literally, because I don't want to put on a false image of myself.
Yeah, for sure. That was a big. And I was involved with all the Christian goth groups for a long time, and that was like, that was the big, see, we can be goth, it's in the Bible. Like, but do you feel like you get, this is something I've been thinking about recently, but do you feel like you are an outsider in goth as well as a Christian? Because sorry, you can answer that. Or is it just, are people just like, yeah, whatever, man, do you.
I think I've kind of come to a really comfortable spot to where I don't really find myself an outsider in either nowadays.
Good. That's good.
Because I have been reassured, and I've made friends and met other people that are Christian goths like myself.
Cool.
Good. And that are really serious about it.
Yeah.
And it just kind of like opened my eyes. I was like in total shock. And going back to just the goth scene as a whole for me, like I said, I'm kind of I'm very mindful and respectful, and I know not to step on people's toes. I don't do that, and I don't want to do that because it happened to me. So I don't want that to happen to somebody else. You know what I mean?
Well, that's
horrible.
That's why it's so part of why that whole goth test thing is so frustrating, because that's the whole thing, is like, we, as goths, we know what it's like to be rejected and to be made fun of and to be kicked out of clubs and told, we don't want you around. And then we're going around to people that want to be into the thing we're into and being like, no, you can't hang out with us, which just seems totally disconnected from what we're into. So, all right, sorry to train wreck the religion thing.
Oh, no,
I'm gonna have to do a new episode on religion, I think, because I've been thinking about that again recently.
That's fine. I appreciate you wanting to talk with me and ask more about that.
All right, let's you were a Buddhist for a while?
Yeah, I was a Gothic Buddhist actually for a while, but it was
fancy.
The form I want to say was Mahayana Buddhism, which just still allowed me to at least have a family and things like that, but practice differently. But yeah, that was my calling or my religious aspect, but I never really counted it as a religion. It was more of a philosophy since there was no deity involved.
Yeah.
Like that was my original struggles before I actually started paying more attention and having certain aspect of respect and understanding towards Christians. Like Christianity has been a part of my family for all of my life, and I bear no ill will towards it. Like there's pros and cons to almost everything, but I would never be against it. It's because it's brought a lot of people together. It's definitely a pretty common good. I'm not a part of it. I do agree, and I will stand up with them if they need me for certain things, like if they need help with stuff.
Is that something you've always tried to? You said you were a Gothic Buddhist.
Yeah.
But is that something you've always tried to merge with your religion or your philosophy, your sort of identity as this goth identity with those other parts of your, like I know you're into gaming and anime and all that other stuff. Is that always something they have worked together, or do you just kind of say like, oh, this is the group that I identify this part of myself, and this is a group I identify with that part of myself?
No, I just merge them essentially together. They seem to just blend in a lot more because the way that goth felt to me was just it was very expressionist and artistic and just make it your own in a sense. And the way I felt towards being Buddhism was, kind of being enlightened. And so they merged a lot for me in that regard because it's like I should be more accepting of who I am. And now that I actually understand it, embrace it, and then just be yourself again. Because I was very clouded for so long, not really knowing what to do, where to go, like how I'm supposed to express myself. I just knew that I like to read and just expel intelligence and knowledge to people. But then it started growing into more stuff like that. But for those, they merged.
I like a lot of aspects of Buddhism, I think. I'm not too learned on the specific tenets of Buddhism, but a lot of the stuff I've heard on their philosophies kind of line up with a lot of things that I am into. So
yeah.
What was the second? So for you, and again, there's no wrong answer to this, just how you sort of understand it. How would you kind of define goth?
It's not a very easy question to answer.
No, it's not.
As we've stated.
Yeah.
As stated, I would have to agree with Autumn that it is like a lifestyle kind of a thing. It feels more like that. Because with me, like I gravitated towards it because it was just an artistic lifestyle expression. Like these colors just represent me, but it's my outside look is that. But once you know me, I'm a lot nicer. I don't exactly, my personality doesn't actually match the way I look, but it just feels like it's expressed artistically through like my clothing. Like I'd have to build my own outfits, and that's more of what I gravitated towards. But yeah, it's not a very easy question to answer. It's very person by person based.
What's your perspective on the health of goth in general, as far as the community aspect and the sort of like event availability aspect and the communication between people and the way that there's all kinds of ways you could take that.
Yeah. To me, it feels more like it definitely is a lot more has been growing and evolving a lot more since like my youth and everything, and growing up with that. But it seems that there's like two evolutions going on. Like there's still the old traditional like goth that is still flourishing, but it's not as like outspoken or not as visible as the other form of evolution, where you're starting to get different titles like fit goth and pastel goth and all these different other ones. I'm like, there's like, why are we like breaking so much of this down? Because some of it doesn't seem that same way, but I'm not saying that they're wrong. That's just how it looks to me. It's like, this is like, that's the more form of goth that seems to be more out there and more publicly shown than what it originally, like what most people have originally seen it as. But I'm with like events and stuff, I'm not too familiar with some of them. Like I still need to look a lot more into it, because it's been like very introverted as I've been growing with it.
I do think that those the pastel goth, the health goth, the ghetto goth, the
okay, that's a new one to
goth,
me.
the whatever, all that stuff that was happening for a while. I think that in retrospect, I think it was actually healthy, because I think from where we're at now, it ended up being this sort of something similar to like when cybergoth happened in the 2000s, or when industrial became really popular, and then we had the death rock revival after that as like a response to it. I think where we're at now, at least looking at the music, is a really good place where there was kind of a backlash to that, to all those different things, and saying, well, what is goth anyway? What is our identity in the 2018, 2014, whenever all that stuff was really popular. And kind of spurned on a lot of soul searching, and then there was some backlash where we got the post-punk revival. We got a whole crop of bands, and then now we've got a lot of dark wave bands. And I do think, while I was really concerned about what is happening, like is goth gonna destroy itself because it's gonna break off into a million different pieces, I think it actually helped us to regroup and grow in a positive direction. I think it feels like
a self-correcting kind of a thing. Like it feels like it does grow, but it's one of those where it does still seem to like realize and expand upon itself, but then come back in and then just blossom out again, kind of like a lotus blossom, essentially. It's what it feels a little bit like to me.
Or Phoenix. level 12 Phoenix or whatever.
Yeah, level 12 Phoenix that is a lot weaker than a level 10 Mr. Hyde or whatever it was.
Everybody applaud.
Hooray, anxiety.
All right. I've got plenty of anxiety medication downstairs. You want a hit? I got a hit for you.
All right, bring it
all right, so tell me a little about how you discovered, what was your introduction, whether it was music or people or TV, or why you got into it, and then why that resonated with you.
I'm going to say it started in my childhood. Very, very young, I was already introduced to the likes of Alice Cooper, David Bowie. Those were very huge in my family.
Your parents are cool, then.
Yes, they are. I am very proud. So I know they're not goth per se, but they can be very darkly inclined, I guess. So a good example is Alice started around the hippie generation. So my dad always used to say he put a stake through the love generation. And he did. And Alice himself would say he played the bad guy because we needed one, So I know a lot of people give credit to like Ozzy and everything. In truth, Alice came first. So I think that's where it started. So for me, it's kind of, I like the villains, and I've loved vampires since I was a kid. I always liked, horror movies and basically the underdogs, the ones that people couldn't understand. It kind of progressed into high school, and I always loved animals, probably more than people, I'll admit.
I don't blame you.
So where I'm going with this is, I agree with Autumn, the whole taxidermy thing. I have a shrine of skulls at home that me and my boyfriend are collecting, and So it's not so much a shrine as a religious thing. It's more, one, it's just cool, but two, it's just giving my love to nature itself, but just, I guess, in a dark, macabre kind of way, if that makes any sense. Yeah, sure. And I like the anatomy behind them because they're all so different. There's so many different sizes, and shapes. And
Well, I just wanted to comment on that. Like, I think a lot of people, are scared of death. That's a really common, like, obvious thing, but like, it's not something that one should be afraid of. It's something that, it's a part of life, and that we should be aware of that it's going to happen, and not be afraid of it, but embrace it just a little bit. That's my comment.
I'm still working on that. I used to be worse as a kid. I used to be really terrified of it, but you're getting older, it's coming,
Yeah.
But yeah, by the time I got to high school, I didn't really know it was a thing, if that makes sense. Like, that goth was a thing. It was just kind of, for me, it was a mindset. So I always had a respect for, again, with the animal thing, just kind of like the bats and like the animals that people didn't really like because they were creepy or, whatever. So spiders became a huge symbol for me because nobody understands them. They just see them automatically. They think they're scary and cruel and mean and all these terrible things. And I kind of felt like that's how goths were always perceived.
Yeah.
So even though it's a cliche thing to like spiders, that's just how I started out. I already liked those kinds of things. When I found out goth was a thing, I kind of put two and two together. I'm like, yeah, this is, I guess it's the umbrella term for what I am thinking, what I'm into, that sort of thing. I remember even as a kid, I think my first experience actually seeing goths were walking through the mall. Maybe they were mall goths. I don't know. I was too young to know, but that was my first experience seeing, a group of them just kind of hanging out. And I was kind of partially kind of weirded out because, you're a kid, you don't know.
Yeah.
So it's kind of partially weirded out, but also very intrigued. And I'll never forget that. Like, I couldn't tell you exactly what they looked like, but I just remember that feeling of like, they look so cool. There's, what is that? What is that called? I'd say I became more goth by the time I got into my 20s when, the internet was a lot more accessible and you can find new music, and it just became a huge hobby for me to kind of keep finding it and kind of branching out. Unfortunately, my early 20s, I went through a phase where I kind of thought, I'm getting older now. I shouldn't, be doing this anymore, yada, yada. So I kind of turned into a normie, I guess. Not even my parents. It was just kind of, that was the people I was hanging out with, who I still am great friends with, and I love them to death. But it was because there was no one else around me that was like this, So I thought, well, maybe I'm just being a weirdo. I like all my horror movies and stuff. And yeah, and I thought my boyfriend hated me at the time for some reason. But yeah, I had this moment of a couple years there where, I was dating people who was nowhere near goth. They wouldn't even watch horror movies. Like, they wouldn't do anything to do with it. And I was thinking, well, I'm an adult now. I have to knock it off.
Suck it up.
Yeah. And then after a couple years of that, I'm like, no, what am I doing? This doesn't feel right. I just internally, externally, whatever. I just didn't feel that it was right, So I kind of got back into it, and that's where the whole DIY thing came in. And I can't afford a lot of the brands that are out there, so I do just piece together a bunch of my outfits how I'm inspired. Like I said, I love vampires, so a lot of my outfits are kind of vampire-esque, but I like, Victorian styles and, the trad goth I like, death rock. I like it all, so I kind of mix into whatever I'm feeling that day and just kind of swing with it.
I remember the first time I saw goth also, and it really is just, it's so striking. When you're a kid, like, it's so different from everything else that I was just immediately drawn to it. And I think my uncle said something like, you don't want to dress like you're gay because people will beat you up, or something like that.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, it took some time, especially for my mom, to get used to it. It started off little things here and there, and I knew she wasn't happy, but, the older I got, the less she can do about it, you know.
Yeah.
So it kind of kept growing. At this point, she accepts it, and it's, you know, it's.
Certain parents didn't understand it, so they'd say it's a phase kind of a thing.
Yeah.
That was always one of
Tell
the.
me that.
Yeah, me
All
too.
the time.
Me too.
My grandfather, who I live with, nowadays, like, I'm very lucky and fortunate that he's so accepting of me. But nowadays, it's kind of amusing because he just kind of pokes fun of me here and there, just like little things like, oh, you take like longer than any woman I've ever met to get ready before you go out, and you look beautiful, darling, or this, that, and the other. But that's just like everyday humor in my house.
That was kind of an
sarcastic, weird humor.
That was kind of an in joke when I was a baby bat about like, oh, which one of you, the guy or the woman takes longer to do their makeup, or you can I can wear your skirt and you can wear my skirt, and all that kind of stuff.
That's
but yeah,
still me to this day.
I think I was into my 20s before my parents gave up on the idea of it being a phase. So it's yeah, I mean they'll get over it eventually. Yeah. I think I read an interview with someone at Whippy Gothic Weekend, and they were saying like, "Mom, I'm 47. It's not a phase, so suck it," or something like that.
It's not my parents that have a problem. It's everybody else.
Everybody else, yeah.
My parents don't care. They accept me for who I am.
I think probably also there seems to be an extra level of condescension when you're a woman, that like about the whole you'll grow up and you'll learn and you'll be like the rest of us kind of thing. It seems like it's worse when you're a woman, but that's
there's a degree still, even in today's little bit more modern society, that women have to catch a man to proceed with their life, and to do that you have to look like that traditional idea of attractiveness to the common man. And I mean, we're moving away from that slowly, way too slowly, but it is progressing, but that still is there, and that pressure is still on, especially women. I mean, men get the, oh, you look gay, you're going to get beaten up, but women get the, you're too strange for men to ever want to have anything with you, you will die alone.
That's actually perfect you say that. That kind of brings me back again to my early 20s, and when I looked more normal, I'll say, I had that same mindset. Like, no one physically told me that, but it was just kind of what was in society was already ingrained. Like I said, when I was in high school, I had to start giving that up because I was so-called growing up, and you were pressured to get a career, and how are you going to get that job if you have all these piercings and tattoos and, whatever. And I felt that same way at the time. I'm like, how am I supposed to find my significant other if I'm so out there and different, and the dating world sucks as it is, and it was hard. It was very difficult, but I found it was almost harder to find somebody because it's like I already had this mindset, even though I physically didn't look it, and you would look great standing next to someone who looks like you, but you had zero in common, because I still had that darkly inclined mindset and this person doesn't, So it was almost like, who am I kidding,
Casted in high school by the Black Clique, I should say. I don't know if I'm... Because there was actually one day, I finally decided to shave more of my head after I grew my hair out. Mm-hmm. And then I walked in with a mohawk finally, because I'd always wanted one. Instantly outcasted by black people. Like, they openly talked to me and like, you ain't black anymore, you ain't part of this. And I'm like, I'm fine with that. Yeah, just for the mohawk. But then other people even of the prep group, they would talk to me and they'd actually say, oh, that's really cool. Like, they'd thank me for it. So it's like a whole mind switch between the two groups.
That
and it
sucks.
was interesting.
I mean, black people basically made rock and roll. Like, they're a huge part of the punk scene and everything.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That was an interesting one.
I'm not black. I can't say anything in rebuttal to that.
Give me your Happy Meal size response to the what is goth question.
Like everyone's been saying, there is no definition. There is no right or wrong. I think it always comes as a mindset first. I think, the clothes, maybe even the music kind of comes a little bit later. I think you kind of have to, I don't know if you're necessarily born with it, but I think you kind of have to have, again, that mindset just to be able to be interested in certain things. Because otherwise you wouldn't be who you are.
So the music and all of that all plays into just your sort of outlook on life, I guess.
You can say that.
Well, I mean, I'm
Classical.
yeah.
Plenty of goth
Me
classical.
growing up.
Baldur's
And-
Winter, the first one.
Mm-hmm.
First movement, very goth. Very goth.
Certain aspects of Beethoven, Mozart.
Yeah.
Mozart's Requiem.
My music transition was very odd because I moved in and I lived with my grandmother, my dad's mom, when I was 6, and I was exposed to country music. Yeah. And it wasn't until like later on in my teens when I became old enough to start finding the kind of music that I like myself, when I got into it, it kind of started for me with like, metal, but then I went backwards to the 70s and 80s and started listening to a lot more punk, and then post-punk and goth rock, new wave, all that jazz. So
My cats are so sad.
yeah. Yes, jazz.
And then what's your take on the health of goth as a community, as sort of the evolution of the last 40 years of music, or online community, in-person community? How do you feel about the state of things?
It's a very loaded question. I'm kind of both-sided on that. I think, the internet's definitely helping kind of getting the word out, reaching to new friends, new events going on around there. And like I said, when I was younger, I didn't have YouTube and, all of that. It was so hard to
Spotify.
find something.
Kazaa and LimeWire, yeah.
And even then,
Is
it was
it a
still hard to
virus? Is
find
it a
something.
song? I don't know.
Exactly. And your computer
Find
blows
out.
up, then you lose everything. You got to start from scratch. So I want to say it's going in the right direction as far as just being recognized in general. How we were talking about all these different types of goth, I don't know. I kind of feel like we're breaking it down too much now. Like, there's just so many like crossbreedings with it, and some of it makes sense, some of it I don't know where it's coming from. I don't. It's hard to say, but I don't know. I'm hoping it's going in the right direction though, and I feel like we're getting more people interested in it.
All right. Well, thanks for this like weird group therapy chat session that we just had.
It feels like AA. I'm not gonna lie.
Anybody have any weird thing that you wanted to talk about, or like axe to grind, or plug, or what? My plugs?
Yeah.
I think you were in the bathroom.
Yeah, you weren't there. You weren't there when we
Oh, yeah,
talked
we
about how
talked
his
about it
son
already.
stole it and has been running around the house sticking into things.
He finds it, he picks it up, and then he sticks it on something, and then I freak out, and he thinks it's hilarious, so he starts giggling, and then I end up chasing him around the house while he's waving my butt plug in the air. And this is not appropriate for the internet. Someone's going to call
This is
adult.
internet.
Yeah, I guess that's fair enough. Check, check. Check, check. Hello.
She was a singer, and she was there.
Oh, that's
in his house. singing these songs. It was awesome.
Hello. Hello. Check 1 2. Check. My podcast is explicitly X-rated, so it's fine. Who wants to?
All right.
All right. Cool. So, let's just start with this then. Yes, you're gonna have to hold that. Just hold it by the. Hold it here, not by the cable, and this is the front part. It's very thick. It's
very
girthy. Yes, exactly. Cool. So I've got 3 basic questions here. So the first one is essentially, what was your introduction to, and we were kind of talking about this already, but how did you get introduced to goth culture, and then why have you stuck with it for so long? What resonated about it for you?
Well, in the 80s, I grew up listening to a lot of music that we would now consider goth and post-punk, although my parents were definitely not dressing like goths or anything like that. Around 1994, 1995, when I was a freshman in high school, I began playing Vampire the Masquerade with my friends. Yes. One night at the Denny's on Oakton, I was sitting with my friend Jeremiah, and he was showing me this new game, and there was a group of actual goths at another table, and this guy came over and asked if he could play with us because his friends thought it was lame. So he would soon join our little group of friends, and he would bring music to play in the background. And one night they went outside to smoke, and at that time I did not smoke. And I was sitting alone in the room and listening to the CD that he brought, and it had London After Midnight on it. And that was really my moment of, I love this, what is this?
Was it a goth box or just a random compilation?
I don't remember, honestly. I just remember it was London After Midnight specifically. And I went to the Hot Topic, and I talked to one of the guys who worked there, and he said, oh yeah, you will like that band. I like a lot of the, especially at that time in high school, I was still in love with my 80s glam rock, hard rock, and London After Midnight had a lot of those influences. Mm-hmm. So I think at that point I got a compilation CD, and that was, London After Midnight was sort of my official entryway. Even though I grew up with a lot of those influences as a child in the 80s, Vampire the Masquerade and London After Midnight was definitely my entryway.
Gateway, yeah.
Goth.
So it was the music. And you mentioned that
Yes.
you were hearing, your parents were playing like Bela Lugosi's Dead and other familiar tracks. Did that kind of pique your interest as well, or was that something like you moved on from and then you got back into it at a later point in life?
Oh no, it definitely piqued my interest. And my parents at that point, you know, it was the mid-90s and I was in high school and CDs were the thing, but my parents still had their old vinyls, so I could go back and flip through, and there was certain ones that I would still see in their collection, such as Pornography by The Cure. Mm-hmm. And I remember as a child flipping through the milk crates that would sit on the floor, sit on the carpet next to, you know, the stereo equipment, and being fascinated by the artwork from some of these albums, such as Pornography and Unknown Pleasures. Mm-hmm. So it sort of brought back a lot of memories from my childhood that I didn't realize that were associated with this subculture that I was discovering as a teenager.
And then did you get into a club scene, or did you make friends, or did you just kind of, was it more of an internal thing that you explored?
Well, for the first, probably I would say 2 years, was just my friends and I playing Vampire the Masquerade and listening to the music. It wasn't until I think it was Rockstock 1997 or 1998, I saw Rammstein. Okay. And I think that was the first time I actually went out in public dressed as a goth. It took me a long time to get to the point of actually dressing like, they called us the freaks back in the day, or the alternatines. That was the phrase that they used.
Yeah.
So that was the point. It was 1997, 1998, Rockstock. That was the first time I really started dressing the way I felt inside and that I listened to the music. So it was sort of a progression. It was definitely several years of listening to music first.
And was it the music or something else that has, I guess, resonated for you on a personal level that's caused you to continue to identify as goth or be interested in that kind of thing?
Definitely the music, for the most part, because the bands that I tend to listen to the most are bands that I connect with emotionally. So there are a lot of goth staple bands that a lot of people like that I don't like because they don't resonate with me on that level. But the bands that do, it's definitely emotional connection. I think there are other aspects to being a goth, especially as you get older, that you have to weigh sort of the consequences of.
Yeah.
But for me, staying true to who I am and having that connection with my inner self, that's the most important thing. I don't feel that it's limiting by any means. I feel like I can always be creative in that space. So.
Yeah. All right. Second question, which is the big one, and there's no right or wrong answer to this, but for you, if you had to, which you have to now, how would you define goth?
First and foremost, I would define goth as a music-based subculture. I know I'm one of those bad elitists.
Piece of shit.
Spank me now. Okay. First and foremost, music-based subculture. Aside from that, I would say probably the popular answer of finding beauty in the darkness, the unknown, the mysterious. Overall, I think most goths have I don't want to say romantic, but perhaps a more poetic or even sensual way of interacting with the world. And sensual isn't limited to sex, that's that I think is lacking in mainstream society. But that's just, my opinion.
No, that's fair. Yeah. And then last question is, how do you feel? What are what do you love or hate about the scene itself? Because goth, conceptually is one thing. Interacting with a community of people is another thing. So what do you love about the community of people, and what do you think some of the challenges are?
Well, that's a hard one to answer because I've lived in different places across the country, and the communities there are very different, even though they are under the goth label.
Yeah.
Overall, I would say the thing that I love the most about going to the concerts and attending the club events and being part of the community is just the sense, for the most part, of feeling that it is a safe space to be creative and to sort of feel more independent. I often go to events myself without friends necessarily or date, and I feel overall safe, whereas in normal clubs I perhaps wouldn't be. As far as the community goes, I think that people are always willing to exchange information about music, and I really enjoy that. I've never experienced elitism as far as music is concerned. As long as you are honest, and I've said, I don't know this band. People are willing to share.
Yeah.
And that is one thing that I love about being a part of the community. As far as the thing that I dislike the most, it's also evil E word, elitism, but it's concerning the way people look. Not looking goth enough, I don't know what the experience is like as a male, but as a female, I've gone to certain clubs and had interactions with people where they just sort of look you up and down and roll their eyes. If you don't meet what the current trend is in the scene at that time, or what they consider as goth, they just dismiss you and they won't even fucking acknowledge you. And I really don't like that.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, fair
that's
enough.
My answer.
I agree. Awesome. Like anything you want to rant about? Any like chips on your shoulder, or like axes to grind that you want to piss on?
I've really had an issue lately with trying to find realistic goth women to relate to that are closer to 40. So I'm 38, and there are a few people that I know, and I'm not mentioning names or anything. I appreciate their content, but their photos are over-edited, they're photoshopped, they're not relatable, and I'm trying to find women that I can look to for, makeup tutorials and things that actually work with like your skin as you get older. And it's just when you see these women that are, closer to 40, but they're photoshopping things so much that they look like a wax doll, it's just completely asinine, and I can't stand it. So, but
Do you want? Trey brought this up on a previous episode. Do you want to mention your thoughts on? Because I don't think it ever really ended up being resolved. We kind of moved on from it. But the idea that goth isn't liberating for older people because it still has those tropes of concealing age and people venerating youth rather than celebrating just how your body ages over time.
Right. When we were talking about...
Sorry, I only have 2 microphones. But
So yeah, I remember on the podcast with Leah, we were talking about how... her experience in club spaces, she was seeing older individuals who were still being comfortable, just being out and having a good time, and she felt that was very age positive. It was a celebration of age. It wasn't a youth culture where the beauty of youth is the epitome of things and everything focuses on that. And I guess my only counter argument to that, or at least my questioning of that theory, is the fact that a lot of the gothic aesthetic, with the pale skin, heavy foundation, powder, makeup, that's hiding physical signs of aging. So the aesthetic can help you hide from your own signs of mortality, your own signs of aging, just by embracing that sort of porcelain aesthetic. Now, as you were saying, there's the photoshopping, sure, but enough makeup and powder, you don't need Photoshop anymore. You're already hiding wrinkles, you're hiding age spots. And that is, it's not the focus of the aesthetic, which is, I think, what was kind of what you guys were really railing against me about, is that I was making an argument that we do that aesthetic to pretend we're not aging. And that wasn't my argument. It's more that the aesthetic itself, just by its nature, hides those things, so you don't have to confront them. Whether it's being done on purpose or not was beside my point.
What do you think about that?
So, as someone who likes to imagine that she is a vampire, I have no issue with the sort of aesthetic and ritual of preparing to go to the club and everything, because we all wear a lot heavier makeup when we go to the club, But here's the thing. When I see someone at the club with the overdrawn lips and the drawn-in eyebrows and the manic panic powder and everything layered on, I can talk to them in person and I see the texture of their skin. I see that the makeup has settled into their pores and wrinkles, and I see that they've overdrawn their lips. And that's fine. I appreciate the art. But when it's photoshopped and edited to where you're looking like a wax doll, you're making your skin look like an unrealistic shade that you can never achieve. I don't think that that's fair, especially for older women. that are in the scene for women of color, which I know there was a YouTuber, and I think her name is Morella. I'm not sure, but she made a video about that. And I really saw what she was saying, that people only thought her makeup was goth when she did the editing to make her skin look white. And that's bullshit.
Yeah, I remember
you
that.
know?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And when I see women that are closer to 40 or in their, whatever years, we need that representation in this community. And when I see it's photoshopped so much and the softening filters, it's frustrating. Because, like I said, it's one thing to see someone in the club with the heavy makeup, and you can appreciate the artistic talent it takes to do that. But you still see that they've overdrawn their lips. I mean, it's completely obvious. But when you're editing it, you're really presenting this fake idea. You've gone beyond the sort of aesthetic to now you're conforming to beauty standards that really focus on... like, what do they say, neotenous facial features, where you're overdrawing the lips and you're doing the contouring to make your face... I could go on and on. Don't get me started.
So YouTube has been brought up. I'm interested, before I get into the questions, I hope you don't mind me saying that you're 18.
Go for it.
I hope that's okay.
That's
fine. This is something I'd like to ask people that I run into in the local scene about how much they actually pay attention to what's going on, both either on YouTube or in Facebook groups, because oftentimes it seems like there's this bifurcation or this separation between people interacting online. Let's just take YouTube for example. People thinking that YouTube is the penultimate expression and community for goth culture, and then we have the in-person scene. So being that you're 18, you don't really have a lot of interaction or ability to go to club nights and that kind of thing. So is YouTube or Facebook or any other online communities your primary way of experiencing and interacting with goth culture?
I don't know. I mean,
you can hold it.
Oh, okay.
Close to your mouth.
Yeah, but honestly, since that's kind of what's brought me to the whole culture and everything. Like at first, it really was, but I've kind of gotten to the point where I'll go on Facebook to see like what events are happening, but I'm not as involved in watching videos or on Instagram like following people or whatever. I've kind of just gotten tired of all the bullshit from it. So that's I'm not really that involved in it now. Like I've made some friends that I still talk to, but we text instead of just through like Instagram or whatever. So
do you follow any subscribe or always watch any particular YouTubers?
There's a small handful, but I mean they're the people who are more realistic. That's what I would say.
That seems to be what the kind of response I've gotten from everyone I've talked to is that if they are, and maybe it's because we live in Chicago, so we have more ready access to a local scene. But most people I've talked to have said they don't really keep up with like Black Friday, Toxic Tears, Riri Phillips, those kind of YouTubers.
Yeah, they're so fake. So.
And that's normally what I hear, which is interesting because it seems like there's this whole other community that venerates these type of and says these are the best goths. I mean, but it seems like those people aren't really even involved with goth culture in general.
I mean, I do have to say that at first, like they, I did follow them for a while at first, sort of when I was getting into it, but then I kind of got tired of how fake it was, So, yeah.
So let's get into what kind of introduced you to goth culture, because I mentioned earlier, but I am interested in what those kind of touchstones are, because for me in high school, those are going to be very different artists and aesthetic references and those types of things that were like, oh, this is something cool that I think I'm into. So for you, what were the first kind of influences, and then did you get into specifically like 80s goth stuff, or were there modern groups that you were into, or was it like models or like how did you get into that kind of thing?
I mean, it kind of came at me from all kinds of different directions because, you know, like I had said, like, you know, the internet's what kind of brought me to it. And I mean, for a long time I had been into, like, you know, alternative rock, you know, hard rock, metal, stuff like that. So of course Marilyn Manson was there, but from other bands, you know, I don't know, like Avenged Sevenfold and stuff like that at first, and then kind of from there growing, you know, discovering different bands, you know, my taste has changed. Oh, sorry, I have to hold it closer. Okay. And then being online, like the visuals kind of really is what brought me to goth, and the art and just how beautiful it was, I'd say, is the main thing that brought me here. I mean, yeah, models were kind of a part of it, but then, you know, looking more into paintings and illustrations and things like that, kind of, that's what's my interest has been, so.
It's funny that you mentioned Avenged Sevenfold because that's still, that was a band that was big when I was in probably college age, which is weird it's interesting to try and figure out what the next thing is, because some people have argued that, well, Marilyn Manson was a cultural phenomena, and that introduced so many people to the goth aesthetic, at least.
Yeah.
So now you have like Motionless in White and whatever all the other kind of not goth bands but use that aesthetic are, and people argue about
Black Veil Brides.
Is this Black Veil Brides? Like, is this getting people introduced to goth, or this is ruining goth? And there's a lot of it's kind of frustrating because the mainstream exposure of those types of bands are fine because it's like Nightmare Before Christmas.
Yeah.
It's not a goth movie, but it introduced a lot of people to something that maybe they wouldn't have
I mean, that was a big thing
before.
for me too, Nightmare Before Christmas.
Oh, okay. So for you, and again, no wrong answer here, how would you define goth?
I would say it's a community, a mindset, and a lifestyle, I guess. Yeah. That's the way I see it.
And then your main interaction with other goths, I don't know how extensive that has been, but what's your kind of something that you love about the community and something that you feel is problematic?
Well, something I love is just how accepting people are, you know, and how welcoming everybody that I've met is. And then something I dislike, I don't know that I can really say much at this point because I'm still new to it and still trying to get more involved. So,
but you're very much excited about getting out to 18 and up events.
Absolutely.
And getting able to go to 21 and up events when you can and that kind of thing, which is awesome because again, I mean I know I mentioned this off mic, but there's a lot of, and maybe you have thoughts about this, but there's a lot of discussion about how goth has continued to age and it's no longer relevant, and that people who are younger won't find any kind of commonality or interest with goth culture because it's so staunchly set in the 80s, and that's not an experience that people in 2018 can relate to.
I don't think that's the case. I mean, I think that the experience that we're going to have is going to be different, of course, but, you know, that's not always a bad thing.
Yeah. So were you interested in the music from the 80s or the music from the 90s, or were you more into,
like I said, like having the internet, there's so many different things and kind of all of it being thrown in your face. So a big thing for me was The Cure, and London After Midnight had been mentioned earlier, and then Christian Death and so many other things. So it's just a little bit of everything.
Have you run into problems with, I guess what would be called elitists, or people that will say, you know, if you don't know enough about a specific artist or a specific topic, you're not goth enough, kind of thing? Or has that not been an issue for you?
I haven't had that issue personally, but I don't know if that's just kind of the circles that I've been involved with and the people I've met. So
that's I think anyone who is out there saying, running into someone at a club and saying, here are my top 5 goth questions, do you pass the test, kind of thing, are just shit people. So it's the level at which you engage with goth culture is going to vary depending on how long you've been goth and if you're interested in it, and people will move in and out and that kind of thing. For you, how long would you say you've identified as goth, or do you like use that label?
I'd say maybe 2.5, 3 years, but even then, like in the beginning, it's not something I like really outwardly expressed as much.
Yeah.
And even now, I don't go around saying, "Oh, I'm a goth," you know.
Yeah. Sure.
I mean, yeah, my family makes fun of me and stuff for it, but whatever.
So, obviously, you're really into DIY, and I mean, people can't see that, but you've got a really awesome jacket that you've made yourself and all that kind of thing. Is this something that you're interested in pursuing element of your identity, or do you think, I mean, and it's kind of impossible to say, do you think this is something you're going to move through and move on from?
I doubt that.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's always kind of been like, art is always something that I've been into, and really always modifying the things that I own and making it my own.
Yeah.
That's always been a part of me.
Okay.
For as long as I can remember, so.
And how did you brought up Christian Death, you've got a Christian Death shirt.
Yeah.
Did you make that yourself?
I did, yes.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Thank you.
How did that kind of impact you, or what kind of drew you to that? Or
actually, the first time I heard Christian Death, I didn't like them. If I'm being completely honest.
Yeah, it was same for me.
And then I kind of found them again and listened to them, because the reason I listened to them again, because, Roswell, he was, anniversary of his death. And that kind of came up online, and I looked it up and found it, and then kind of fell in love with the sound. So, yeah.
So that's and that brings up another question, is the idea that as we move further away from the 80s, the relevance of that type of sound will be less and less, so that younger people will not be able to identify with 80s goth, and they'll maybe get more into Witch House or some kind of newer sound that is relevant to that cultural zeitgeist. But for you, did that sound of the 80s still kind of resonate with something you were interested in?
I mean, I'd say yes, but my interests are all over the place.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't really even know what Witch House is, but
I think that's the healthiest way to approach it, is not to pigeonhole yourself into one thing, and to be open to all kinds of new things, and I think that's something that you do really well, and something I try to do as well. So. Well, if you've made it this far, you are truly a fan of the show, and I am so thankful that you shared this year with us. It's been, we're moving into 6 years now, going into February, and there's a lot of really amazing shows planned for 2019. I look forward to sharing those with you and going on that journey with you. So thanks for listening. Thanks for hanging out with us on this bonus hiatus episode. If you haven't yet subscribed, please go ahead and click the subscribe button, whether you're in iTunes or Android or on YouTube, so you won't miss any content going into the future. And as always, if you appreciate the show and you want to support what we're doing and help to keep us on the air, paying our bills, and making more episodes, head over to patreon.com/Cemetery Confessions. Thank you all so much. And until next time, stay dark.
The preceding program is a member of The Belfry, a network of blogs, podcasts, and videos for the darkly inclined. Go to thebelfry.rip for more information.